Good morning, everybody. My name's Hewson, Daphne if you're annoyed with me, but I do prefer Daph. We're on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and future, and to any Aboriginal people who are present today. This is Juka Juka. It's Walpri land, which is about 350 kilometres from Alice Springs. I live in Alice Springs now, sold up Sydney, a desert change, enough of this place. Alice Springs is Aranda country. And I love to go out to places like this. My partner and I have totally changed our lives. In January, we got married. The law changed, and so us girls were allowed to get married. So it's a new life in Alice and all of that stuff. Okay, so what are we going to do in this workshop? First of all, we're going to look at the goals of supervision, because if you don't know what your goals are, you don't know what you're trying to achieve. Secondly, we're going to do reflective practice. This is the clay pans just outside of Alice. That's Mount Gillen in the background after we've had a bit of rain. Then we're going to do, in the reflective practice, tools, both major tools, and there's a toolkit for that I'll work you through, but also mini tools. The mini tools are one-liners. We're going to do feedback, both how to give it and how to receive it. And the trick there is the receiving it. I got into supervision in 1979. I was home having my first baby, so I needed part-time work. So I got myself a job in the community health system in a new child and family therapy team as a group supervisor. Now, there are a few problems with this appointment. Number one, I knew nothing about group process. Number two, I knew nothing about supervision. And number three, I knew nothing about child and family systemic work. But I had a PhD, so I got the job. This is how I was doing my supervision. It's, you know, the Peter Principle, promotion to the level of incompetence. So when I returned to university in '85, I decided to specialise in supervision and groups. So I like to think that my tiles line up better these days than they did then. In the time while I've been specialising in supervision, I've come to the conclusion that there's 6 main principles for good supervision. Role induction, and I'm going to talk about role induction a lot today. The fact is, supervision is a dance between two people. Well, two if it's individual supervision. It doesn't matter if you're a world champion tango dancer. If they can't do a dance step, the dance doesn't go very well. So they need role induction and training so they can dance with you. Structure, you need a very clear structure and contracting. You need a good, strong alliance. You need to know who's responsible for what. You need to know how to give and receive feedback, with the most important side of that, how to receive feedback. And you need to know how to reflect. So I'm going to briefly talk about those first 4 today. The workshop is on the last 2. And reflection is my main thing. So I retired from academia 12 years ago, and what I've been doing since then is developing a reflective practice approach, and wrote a book and a toolkit. And we're going to go through the toolkit so you get to know how to use it. I wrote this with Michael Carroll from England. So there's the book and toolkit. So given you're here, what do you want to do with the day to make it worth your while? What do you want me to focus on? What are your goals? Often when I start to ask people what they want, they start with things like, how do you fill in the board's forms? And I have to say to people, look, if you need those things, go and do the basic training. This is a specialist masterclass in reflective practice. But look at this list. Reflective masterclass in reflective practice. Specialists, you're right on the ball. Yep. But that's enough to keep us going for now. Now, reflection means, first of all, stopping and noticing before you move on to meaning making. So to keep us in the notion of noticing, which is the first bottom line step, each module's going to start with an image where your job is to stop and notice a face in it. This is the easiest one. They get harder as the day goes on. So we've got a hat, big nose, eye, mouth, throat. Can see that face? I warn you, people say once they've done this workshop, everywhere they go, they see faces. So, what are the goals of supervision? To the general public, the supervisor is like the foreman on the factory floor. They're going to tell you what to do. They're concerned with quality assurance. In the health professions, we have a much broader perspective about what supervision is. We see it as having three different components. One is client care. We're responsible for keeping the public safe. One is professional standards. Supervisors of trainees are responsible for checking they meet the standards of the profession to get their registration. And professional development, developing the person's functioning. Given there's so many things to do, you have to focus on one. A lot of people focus on supervision for client care. They have the idea that case management at what it is. So supervision is a person brings a case, you tell them how to fix it, they go and do it. This is puppet intervention. You can do it quicker and better. So what you're wanting is the very best intervention with this client, get rid of the person you're supervising and do it yourself. That's not what we're there for. We are responsible to make sure the client is safe, but we're not responsible that the trainee does the very best specialist work with them. Others focus on professional standards, reporting to the board, forms. We're carried away with litigation these days, so they get hung up on this. What that feels like to the person being supervised is it feels like snoopervision. When you feel it's snoopervision, you're defensive, you can't learn. Obviously, you are required to do assessments. You want to tuck them in a way that makes it feel safe for the person. What supervision's really for is professional development. In the background, you're checking the safety of the client, and in the background, you're assessing their performance. But what you're particularly doing is professional development. So that means that the goals of supervision is to develop and maintain the practitioner's competent professional functioning, that's the bottom line thing, and well-being. And I'll come back to the well-being part in a minute, while safeguarding client care. In the background, you're safeguarding client care. And sometimes you're also evaluating and reporting, but you're not evaluating and reporting in every session, so it's a further background task. Now juxtapose that with consultation. Consultation is develop and maintain the practitioner's competent professional functioning and well-being, same as, while safeguarding client care, same as, but you only do mandatory reporting. So in our peer consultations with each other, this is what we're doing. And in a lot of that stuff you do in the workplace, where you're supposedly supervising other people, you're actually consulting because you're not evaluating and reporting on them to the board or to a university. Our work touches us, vicarious trauma, etc., and we touch our work. How well we are affects our work. If we're screwed up, our work will screw up. In order to avoid these two problems, some people turn themselves into a robot. Being a robot does not do good work because then you leave your humanness out. And the research actually shows that one of the most impactful things that's happening in our therapeutic relationships is that therapeutic relationship. So turning yourself into a robot doesn't do anything. The British miners in the 1920s fought for what they called pithead time. That's the right to wash off the grime of the work on the boss's time rather than taken home. So as I said, I think we need now's pithead time at the end of every shift. And with that pithead time, we can debrief ourselves, so we're not taking the work home with us and we're reducing our risk of vicarious trauma. But we can also debrief on what we're bringing to the work and how we're managing that. We're allowed to have life crises, we're allowed to have other things happening for us. We don't have to be pure and 100% psychoanalysed every day of our work, but we need to know how to manage our stuff in our work. So pit head time would be the way to do that. So there is a space for this, and I'll come back to that later, and someone's put therapy on the board. Okay, the roles that we can take. A lot of people come to supervision in the role of a prisoner. They don't want to be there. They're forced to be there by the board or the university or their manager. A lot of people come to these workshops as prisoners. They don't want to be here, but they have to do it to get their bit of paper. All you can do with prisoners is give them maximum freedom within their prison to do what they feel they want to do. You can't let them out, but you can give them freedom to use the time how they want. They're then likely to move to the role of visitor. Our new house in Alice has 4 bathrooms. So when you're in Alice, drop in to visit me and I'll send you to clean the 4 toilets. Now you're thinking, if you're in Alice, you won't visit me, aren't you? Who wants to do that? How often do we give our clients toilet cleaning tasks, and then when they don't do them, we call them resistant? There's a whole literature on resistant clients, and there's a whole stuff in supervision about how to deal with resistant people that you're supervising. Well, the answer is quite simple. Stop telling them to clean the toilet. Instead, have a cup of tea with them and a chat with them, so they're pleased to visit you. Once you do that, they'll move into a role of complainants. Complainants are people that have got a problem and they want it fixed. If you've worked with adolescents, they want the cops, their parents and the school off their backs. By definition, they don't have a problem. It's the other people that have got a problem. If you've worked with couples, they're each complainants ready to help you fix the other one. In supervision, the complainants are complaining about their manager, the board, the university, life. Complainants have energy for change, but it's not change in them, so they're not the easiest people to work with. Much easier is to work with people who are customers, and the ideal thing you want to do when setting up your relationship is to have 2 customers. A customer wanting what you've got to sell and you being a customer to providing it to them. So I liked it when someone said make it more meaningful, including meaningful for you, means you're a customer for working with them. Now this person's got it right. They want flowers and this person's selling the flowers they wanted. If what they needed was fish, they're at the wrong stall. And sometimes one of the reasons why supervision isn't working is that we're really good at flowers, but they're needing fish. And I've chosen fish for the other stall here because dead fish is going to be a theme for the day later on. So how do you create customers? First of all, you maximise social power. Social power is different to structural power. When you're appointed as a supervisor, you have structural power to assess and report on the person. Social power is when something that you earn in their eyes, no one else can allocate it, when they decide they want to be supervised by you. So earning that is a central part to forming a working relationship. The other way to turn people into customers is to maximise choice. Humans are interesting. The more you tell them they have to do something, the more resistant they are. The more you give them choice about how to do it, the keener they are to commit to it. So within the constraints that have been set by outside stakeholders, you want them to have maximum amount of choice about how they go about it. And the third one is maximise readiness. Only work on what they're ready for, and I'll come to a metaphor for that later in the day. There's a face there, face on a long body. There's an old crone tucked in behind. There's a baby there. There's another face up there and another one down there. There's lots of faces in that one. Okay, Abe Lincoln said, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree. I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Too much supervision is done with a blunt axe. You never get the tree down, you just get RSI. So when you're starting, you have to get into sharpening your axe. How do you do that? Let's look at this super mouse. You've got the clinician and the supervisor. You're both people with your experience, expertise, worldview, orientation, etc. You both need role induction and training about how to do it. Today, another training you've done is your role induction. What role induction have they had? I'll come back to that later, but they need it. Then you set up the external structure. Who are the stakeholders? What do they require? Who has to report on what? How often do you have to do it? A whole pile of things about accountability. When you get clear everything outside, you then get together and set up your internal relationship, form an alliance, needs assessment and contract. I think it is a good idea to have a written contract. And that's not the contract that you send to the board or the university. Those contracts are virtually a checklist saying, I promise to do all the things you say we're supposed to cover. But they're not a contract about how you'll meet, what methods you'll use, what you'll do when someone cancels, how you'll structure each session. There's a whole pile of stuff. So again, on the webpage Reflective Supervision, you'll find a very brief article about contracting and a list of the sort of things that you might want to put into a contract. Then once you've got your internal thing done, you've got all those done, you've now spent your 4 hours sharpening the axe. Now you're ready to do supervision, both facilitating their learning and evaluating them. If you hit any problems here, the most likely thing you need to do is go back and fix it up here. Because if you're hitting any problems, it means your axe has started to get blunt, and you go back and think, what is it that's not clear or working up here? And if you're not both customers, of course, this isn't going to work. So, that was Supervision 101. On a packed day, I didn't really want to do that stuff, but I discovered that people come to these workshops from a whole range of backgrounds, and unless we did that little bit of structural background, we weren't sort of all on the same page. But it was very brief, and you'll need to go and download those documents and learn more about it if you don't have background training. I'm now going to assume that you know how to do that, except there was one thing someone said here, communality of purpose and process. When you're contracting, one of the things you do is contract there both with the person and with the other supervisors, because you're allocating tasks there and allocating methods and allocating style and allocating everything, and you all have a contract in that. So that's nutted out up there. And if you're having problems with different purpose, it's not an ongoing thing, it's going back and recontracting. And sometimes it means changing the secondary supervisor, because sometimes that person is a completely different orientation to you or a completely different way of doing business to you, and it's not possible for the person to deal with the two of you. And if they have to have the two of you and you're completely contrary, then you've just got an impossible problem, and I don't know, yeah. And the other bit of paper you've got has got some balloons on it. This is a reflective journal. Now this is set up in a way where you can use it in your portfolio as your reflective journal for your CPD. The info up at the top there is if you're a psychologist, because psychologists need to put that info on their journals, okay? So the other items then are the helium balloon. From here up in the skull, there is nothing but hot air. Information floats in one ear in the shape of a helium balloon and floats out the other ear in 10.4 seconds. I actually made that figure up because I know you like hard data. The basic thing is it's fast. If you are menopausal, pregnant, intoxicated, or I'm discovering over 70, it goes even faster. Doesn't even hit the sides. So if you want to catch your helium balloons before they escape, you have to tie them to the brain. And the way to tie them into the brain is to notice them and consider what they mean. Now, you know how helium balloons go flat after a few days? If all you do is catch them and tie them to the brain, they'll go flat and you'll have all these flappy, flat balloons flapping around there in your skull, but they won't be useful for anything. To keep the information, you have to embed it in the brain. And the only way to do that is to put it into practice. So the helium balloons are, first of all, what did you find most interesting or helpful in what we've talked about so far? That's noticing. What are the implications for practice? That's considering meaning. And you've got to do that. But I also want you to notice at the bottom of the form it says action taken. So if you go to my webpage, reflectivesupervision.com, you'll find this version of the form that you can use if you're a psychologist, and another version of the form without the gump at the top that you can use if you're one of the other professions, and you can just photocopy lots of them. So you take them along to workshops, you take them to supervision, you give one to people, no, you get them to bring their own to supervision so as they can keep their records. You use it in peer consultation. This is your standard form afterwards. So see if you can catch some helium balloons from what we've done so far today. What would the principles be for good reflective supervision? Not jumping to tips, advice. Fix it. Isn't that what we do as supervisors? Aren't we there to fix it? Isn't that your job description? And everyone works really hard to do that, except it's 100% the wrong direction. Yep. Excellent. That's the bottom line. If it's not safe, it won't happen. Role induction. What's another one? Internal processes. More and more, as the research comes out on trauma, we're discovering that a lot about what's happening for us is happening in internal physiological, emotional processes that are not cognitively understood, and that's where all the goodies is. I mean, what's Bessel van der Kolk's book called? The Body Keeps the Score. Well, the body does keep the score in supervision as well. Listen to what the body and the emotions are telling you, because there's a lot in there for stuff you want to work with. Collaborative. Yeah. Now I put those examples in as groups because often someone asks for group supervision today, and there's no way we can do groups. So we're on individual all day, but I thought if I just put that little bit of group, it gave you a taste, and that's in fact the main point I wanted pulled out there. The group reflective practice is a collaborative approach where the whole group's been trained up how to do it and they're all involved. It's not the leader running the group while the others sit and watch someone being asked to reflect. So that's a good one. Let's have a look at how we can summarise all of these, because I know you've got more, but we can put them together. On page 8, we've got the term space. So the S in space stands for safety first. Now, if there's only one thing you take from today, I want you to write it on your forehead, safety first. So many of the problems in supervision are safety problems. Boundary problems are safety problems. The manager is safety problems. Communality of purpose is safety problems. Bottom line, if people don't feel safe, They can't do reflective supervision. In fact, they can't do much supervision at all, but they certainly can't do reflective supervision. So setting it up to be safe is important. You're on an amazing journey. You're going to have lots of interesting things happen, but it's dangerous. When Adam felt unsafe, his supervisor pushed him off the cliff. It wasn't really good supervision. When Ben felt unsafe, he verbalised it, the group supported him, and that contributed to the supervisory process because he knew out his feelings and he knew safety mattered. The second thing, P, stands for process. Keats said of Shakespeare that he had negative capability. Negative capability means being in uncertainties, mysteries and doubts without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. You were trained in positive capability. You were trained how to do an interview and gather data, how to make a diagnosis, how to plan an intervention, how to implement it, how to assess it, how to modify it, how to report on it. Positive capability, all excellent skills, and skills you do need to supervise in supervision. But the other thing you need in supervision to do reflective supervision is negative capability, which is just sitting on your tin can on your jetty, throwing your line out and being with the process. So to remind you of that, that photo is on the front page of the toolkit, which you'll have in supervision. And every time you're thinking, this isn't working right, where should it go, what should I do? You glance at that and think, just wait and see if I get a nibble. Just see what happens. It's about process, not content, as someone so beautifully put it at the beginning. I like this list, it's great. The third one, A, is being aware and outing your emotions. There's going to be a huge range of emotions. It's okay to notice them. It's a good idea to out them. Especially when you're working with new trainees, they've got the sense that if they're a proper professional, they'll be objective and unemotional. You know, a proper serious person. And when they have a tight chest, they know that that would be just the biggest sin on earth and would be marked against them. You might even report it to the board. So the last thing they're going to do is let you know their emotions. So again, in role induction, you want to take them through this so they understand what this is about and help them to know that it's okay to out them. The next one's curiosity. I'm a narrative therapist, and Michael White used to have a term that really is relevant here. He said what we're trying to do in our work is to exoticize the domestic. You notice I had to pause to say that. I don't want to say the wrong word there, but I got it out right. By that he means take the domestic taken for granted every day, look into that and notice it in detail, and you'll find that it's very exotic. You don't need to go looking for outside things. This is exotic as you can get in the domestic. That's an ant, that's a fly, and that's a bee. You stop and notice what's in front of you, and there's plenty to work with there. You're curious about what's happening, not in that other headspace of jumping around trying to have positive capability of finding goodies to bring in. And the E stands for embrace. The quote here from the Zanders is that I actively train my students that when they make a mistake, they lift their arms in the air, smile and say, how fascinating. These are my grandkids. Tyler for many years was alone in a photo for this, and Mia, who's a me too, would hear him say, Ma, did you show my photo at work? And I'd say yes, so she said, I want you to show my photo at work too. So we retook the photo. Now all she's doing is what her mum's showing her off camera she needs to do to be in the photo. What he's doing is performing this. He knows that quote. So haven't I trained him well? 7-year-old boy who knows how to learn from mistakes? No. He knows the quote, but when he makes a mistake, he goes into shame, just like any other 7-year-old. By a very young age, we learn to cover up our mistakes, to hide them, to be embarrassed by them, and not to see them as learning opportunities. That carries through, and when you're supervising, that's the belief system behind it. How do you get people to come to supervision saying, it's absolutely great, I made 3 mistakes this week, can't decide which one we'll do first. If you can get that happening, you're in business. But again, role induction, because if people don't know that that's what you want, they think, hide it. One of the things here is they need to know you're not going to write their mistakes down and send a letter to the board the next day, because that's what they think you're going to do. When people get faced with mistakes, they're prone to shame. People who have got a trauma background are more vulnerable to shame than those who haven't. I think perhaps because part of the trauma, especially in abuse trauma, is the person's taught that it's their fault, they're bad, they deserve it. So they learn that they're bad from a very young age. So in fact, that's one of the biggest, worst legacies of trauma. So then when they come to supervision, they're more prone to being shamed when something goes wrong. I think, haven't got data on this, but I think there's a higher rate of people with a trauma background who move into the health professions. And given that it's about 1/4 of the general population, it's likely to be 1/3 or half of the people you're supervising have some trauma in their background that's going to affect how they function in supervision. So you need to know how to manage shame, notice it. Now, managing shame in supervision is not therapy. That's managing the interpersonal relationship there, noticing where the person's at and helping them to get settled. But if they're in that space, guess what? They don't learn a thing in that space. So to carry on regardless is just to waste your time and perhaps harm them. So we want no B or F words at all in supervision. You know what the B and F words are? Blame and fault. Not those other 2 words that you were thinking about. So here's the vision you want. You can download this vision from an online site called Shutterstock and blow it up and put it on your wall and say to people they need to feel like this during supervision, and if they're not feeling like that, let you know they don't feel safe enough. And the reason that it's good that there's 2 monkeys in this one is it reminds you that in group supervision it's even harder to be safe because you've got more than one person picking over you. So you especially need this in group supervision. This is your model for what you're aiming for when you're sharpening your axe. Is this how your people feel? And is this how you feel when you go to supervision? And if you don't, change your supervisor or teach them how to make it safe. Can you see a face here? Flat head, mouth, chin. You can see the face. Let's turn this to the left. Now we've got a smiley face. Yeah? You can see that? Excellent. Okay. Confucius in gender sensitive mode said, give a person a fish and you feed them for a day. Teach them to fish and you feed them for 100 years. If you're giving advice, if you're in fix-it mode, you're handing out dead fish. Dead fish are smelly. And people can only eat a little bit before they're full and they can't take any more in. The only time to hand out dead fish is when there's an urgency for the person, either for their functioning or the safety of the client. By all means, then give them dead fish, keep them alive. But then as quickly as you can, move to the space where you're teaching them to fish. Your job as a supervisor is that they can fish and feed themselves for the rest of their lives, not sit by your side while you give them dead fish for the rest of their lives. So whenever you give advice or whenever you're in fix-it mode, you're in dead fish mode. Kolb says that knowledge results from a combination of grasping experience and transforming it. Notice who did the grasping and notice who did the transforming. Your job is to help him to notice that there's something there to grasp and to help him to transform it. But he has to do it for himself. One of the ways that people think that you can give people information is to, it's either called the banking method, bank your knowledge in their head, or pour your knowledge into their empty skull. If you do that, it all leaks out the ears. Waste of time. Others give advice. Advice usually gets yes but. Either a direct yes but, or if they're intimidated by you, under their breath they're thinking yes but as they smile sweetly. Experiential learning, on the other hand, means sitting at the feet of my own experience. What is the benefit of sitting at the feet of your own experience? There's an approach known as SPSR, self-practice, self-reflection. There's a fabulous new book on it, well, it was 2015, by James Bennett Levy and colleagues. The reference to it is in the back of your book. It's called something like Experiencing CBT from the Inside Out. It's a book about learning CBT using SPSR. So it teaches you a lot about reflection, and also if the people you're supervising need to learn CBT, it's a great way to teach them that as well. And those of you that have worked with me before know that CBT isn't top of my fave list, but I still think this is one of the best books around. In this approach, in the basic paradigm, they would teach a group cognitive skills. And in one group would just get that training, and the other group would also do SPSR. They'd practice it on themselves, and then they'd keep a reflective journal. That second group understood the concepts better, were more skilled at them, and had more confidence than the first group. Given that, and this has been replicated in many, many studies, started in 2004, given that, why would you possibly want to train or supervise anyone without using SPSR built into your model? It's basic evidence-based practice. So, given that, how are you going to facilitate learning? Are you going to bank in their head or give them advice or use reflection? It's a bit more complicated than that. Sometimes you do have information you want them to know, and it would be a bit ridiculous to think, well, I'm not going to tell it to them because they might, it might go out their head. So you do bank it, or you do pour it in their head, but then you get them to reflect on it. So given this information you've given, how does that fit with your understanding? How would you use that? What would the meaning of that be for you? What do you like about it? What don't you like? So they actively engage with it. Sometimes you do give advice, they ask for advice, how should I do that? You give them advice because you think they genuinely want it, and you have got a good tip you could give them, but then you get them to reflect on it. Or the rest of the time, the method you use for their learning is reflection. So reflection isn't an add-on that we do now and then instead of something else. Reflection is the basic component of their learning. So given this, what is reflection? Reflection is being a crocodile. When I was up in the Kimberley, got up early one morning and went out to watch the birds. And about where you're sitting, a croc slowly came up in the water. So I was a bit panicky, but I realised I was safe up on the platform that I was on. But all these ducks were swimming around its head, and I thought I was about to see nature do its thing, and I hadn't even had breakfast. I was not looking forward to this sight. But the croc didn't touch the ducks. So I went back to the lodge and asked about it, and they explained to me that what it takes to do that big snap uses a huge amount of energy. So if crocs went snapping at anything that moved without making sure there's a net gain in the movement, they'd starve to death. So to be living croc, you have to do two things. First of all, you have to be mindful and notice. You have to notice your shadow, you have to notice a ripple, you have to notice a noise. And then you have to decide, is that worth it? You have to consider its meaning, is it worth it? When they looked at the ducks, which they had to notice because they were right close, nah, not worth it. If I'd fallen in, worth it. So what you're doing really in supervision is just being a croc. Very simple. Of course, our consideration of meaning making is a bit more complex than worth it, but it's the same principle. So if that's what reflection is, what's reflective practice? Reflective practice is putting this into practice. Human beings are renowned to not put things into practice, to get big insights, learn new things, and then ignore them and carry on regardless. So reflective practice is noticing, putting meaning to it, coming to some learning from it, and then putting that into practice. We're going to do a short section on putting it into practice this afternoon, which we call consolidation. So we've got three stances: mindfulness, noticing, whether it be noticing faces on the board or noticing the ripples in the water or what's happening. Then there's considering meaning of what we've noticed, and then there's consolidation. And reflective practice is doing all of these. If we do this, we end up with two layers of outcome. On the surface, we get practical solutions to what it is that they asked for because they emerge from our reflections. But we also get a deeper layer. We fine-tune and consolidate our practice framework. So what is this practice framework thing? Social workers are taught a lot about practice frameworks. Psychologists tend not to be taught much about it at all, don't even know they've got one. So until morning tea, we're going to do practice frameworks. This is the framework of the ship on which you're going to go and sail in these choppy seas. It's going to be covered up, but this is the framework inside that guides the ship. You need to figure out what you're putting into it. Let me take an example of different practice frameworks you might have tucked in there. A principal realises there's a lot of bullying happening in a school. So they bring some consultants in to ask them what should be done about it. One consultant says, I don't agree that it's a problem, leave it to the kids to sort it out for themselves. Another says it'll become a huge problem, discipline the bullies. Another says the victims leave themselves open, provide groups to teach them how to stand up to bullies. Another says the victims have been traumatised, provide group treatment. And another says prevention requires a change in public attitudes. They are totally different practice frameworks. They're differing in terms of how they define what a problem is, who it's a problem for, how you get change to occur, and who you work with in that change. They all believe they're giving expert advice, but it's expert advice from a particular practice framework. On the next 2 pages of your handbook, there's a list of all, well, not all, as many as we could think of, things that are in your practice framework. And a good thing to do would be to take this to your peer consultation sessions, work through it with your peers and work out what's my practice framework.